So are we live? Is this thing on? Hello, everyone. How are you all doing? This is Hadi coming to you from where? I can't remember where I'm coming from. Oh, yes, I'm coming from somewhere, Spain, Malaga, Spain, and from behind the screen. And I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about Ktor. Now, for those of you that don't know what Ktor is, it's a client and server framework for creating applications. And what we're going to be covering today is get a glimpse of what we've been working on with Ktor 2.0. The current release of Ktor is 1.6.4, and we want to show you a little bit the highlights of what's coming in 2.0. So let's get going. And if you have any questions, I think my colleague Alex is going to be collecting them, and I'll address them afterwards. Stay tuned to the chat. This is live. This is not pre-recorded. You knew that. Why? Because I walked on stage. Do you see that? I'm walking on the stage. I'm doing it again. There you go. I'm walking on stage. I could have done that recorded as well, but trust me, it's live. In fact, I'll prove to you it's live by holding up a newspaper, which nowadays is a phone. You can see the phone, you see the date. Yep, we're live coming to you. Okay, so let's get going. What does 2.0 bring for us? Well, first of all, it brings you 30 plus new features. The next thing it's going to bring you is 40 plus bug fixes. And of course, we'll try and fix all of the new bugs that we've introduced by bringing those new features, which I hope is zero, but you know, this is software development and these things do happen. But more importantly, it really, and I want to stress this point and the next one, which is it sets the foundation on which we're going to build on many, many things. So we have been adopting SEMVer, semantic versioning, for Ktor since last year. And that implies that anything that is not a major version will not do any kind of breakage of API compatibility. And we try and respect that. So 2.0 has given us the opportunity to build a lot of things that we wanted to build on and simplify a whole bunch of concepts, meaning it's setting the groundwork for not only 2.x, but also 3.x and everything that comes after that. So it also brings a bunch of breaking changes, because I did say that this is kind of like a little bit of major version, so there's going to be some breaking changes. But don't worry, these are good. They're good. If a breaking change is for a good reason, then it's a good breaking change. So let me tell you something that a lot of people may not know. And I mentioned this at the beginning of the session, which is Ktor is not only a server framework. It's not only saying like, oh, Ktor is a server framework for Kotlin to do web applications or microservices, etc. It is also a client framework. And if you've ever done any kind of development with Ktor, you may have seen a list of imports like this. So you've got io.ktor.application.star. And I know everyone's going to hate me for the star, but let's just pretend that the star isn't there. Let's focus on everything's before the star. io.ktor.client, io.ktor.http. And you start to see here a weird pattern. You see some things that have client, you see some things that have server, and then you see some other things that just don't have anything. And this is a problem, because especially if you're trying to do any kind of client and server development at the same time using Ktor, you kind of feel like, what am I meant to be including? What am I meant to be referencing? What module, what packages, what? So one of the breaking changes that we have introduced is to actually name things properly. You know, they do say the whole naming is hard. We're really trying this time. Promise you, we're really trying to name things properly. And what that means is that a lot of packages have changed names, meaning that now on the silver lining of this is that I have a whole bunch of io.ktor.server, and I have a whole bunch of .client, and I have a whole bunch of not .client and not server, meaning it is common shared code that you can use from both of these, either from the client or the server. But we make it very clear now what is server and what is client. Another issue that a lot of people have been complaining about with Ktor is what I've kind of called the Ktor roulette game, which is why, well, I had to give this slide a title. But I'll give you an example of what this means. You say, oh, I need compression. So I need to add compression to my Ktor server application. Which module should I include? The answer is nothing. Of course, you shouldn't include anything. It's already included in the server. Why wouldn't you know that? Because I wouldn't. Exactly. You wouldn't. There's nothing intuitive about it. Then you're like, okay, so I've added my compression. I need some authentication. Which module should I include? Well, obviously, the one that is called auth, right? There's a module that is called auth, and that's the one that you should be including. Yeah? I mean, it's logical. That's the problem. Again, much like you saw with the package names, the modules aren't clear. Some of them were randomly included in the core server, others were not, and it makes discoverability very, very, very difficult. So we've tried to create sane and discoverable modules. And essentially, this means that you have to add a whole bunch more modules to your Gradle or to your Maven application build file, but it does kind of isolate things exactly as they're meant to be, and it makes it more discoverable. So if I want partial content, you know that most likely I need to include some package that is called partial content, module of partial content. Now, this also has another side effect, which is now our server core is very, 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 very thin, right? So we don't have really much anything there. And it also highlights another aspect, which is that Ktor is heavily built on the concept of features which are now called plugins, but we'll get to that. And the point being that every functionality now is its own module as its own plugin. Now, for those of you that are coming to Ktor 2.0 from 1.6, this can get a little bit painful. Trust me, I updated the samples recently. It wasn't that painful. Obviously, in my case, I was updating like 50 or whatever number of samples, and they kept all having to include the same thing. But hopefully, it's not going to be that much of a pain. And you only have to do it once until 3.0 when we rename everything. No, I'm joking. We won't rename anything in 3.0. Okay, well, maybe something, but not this. But we've prepared a migration guide for you, which will be published soon. And that gives you basically a mapping of how to go from 1.6 to 2.0. But we also have been working on another thing, which will be available shortly as well, which is trying to automate the migration for you as much as possible. Now, I have a few screenshots of how this will work. And you can see that at the bottom right corner inside IntelliJ IDEA, if you're using IntelliJ IDEA for Ktor development, you'll see that it detects a new version of Ktor, and it asks you if you want to migrate the project. When you hit yes, then it will detect all of the modules being used, and automatically it should migrate everything for you. And my colleague Vadim has been working very hard on getting this to work. So hopefully it won't be that painful for people that want to migrate from 1.6 to 2.0. In addition, we are also preparing a series of structural search and replace templates. If you don't even know what that means, now would be an excellent time to find out. So both in IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate as well as IntelliJ IDEA Community Edition, you have this concept of a structural search and replace, which is a very powerful way to search for specific code patterns and replace them with other patterns. So this is what we've also been preparing as a series of templates which we make available, so that if you're not using IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate and you don't have the plugin for Ktor, then you can just use the structural search and replace to do this upgrades. But as I said, if you have a single application, I mean, again, you're not going to be uploading 20 different Ktor applications. If you have a single application, it shouldn't be that much of an issue. Okay, now let's dive in a little bit in Ktor for the server and see some of the things that we have been working on. And again, I want to stress the point of trying to simplify things. We're trying to make simpler APIs. We're trying to give you much saner defaults so that you don't have to do a lot of configuration. And if you missed the note about this, which we mentioned several months ago, I think 5 or 6 months ago, I can't remember exactly, we have renamed the concept of feature to plugin. So in Ktor, before you had everything was a feature, and then someone would say, oh, what features does Ktor have? And you're like, well, it has this feature, and how do I use a feature? Well, you install a feature. It was a little bit confusing. And the concept of plugin is easily understood. So we've renamed this to plugins. So everywhere that you see plugins, that used to be called features. In addition to this, we are adding to the multi-platform story, because if you're using Ktor on the client side, Ktor is a multi-platform library, and you can target JavaScript, you can target JVM, you can target iOS, Android, all of the different platforms for your client applications. Now, if you are trying to target some stuff on the server side, the problem is that mostly right now it's only JVM. So 2.0 is going to bring native support to the server. So you can now compile natively using Kotlin native and run a Ktor application on the server. Obviously, this adds to the option of being able to also use GraalVM, which is available based on the type of engine you use. Currently, it seems to work well with CIO. With Netty, there are some issues with Netty itself, so we're still working on that. But you can already kind of do this with GraalVM. But now you should be able to compile your server applications to run via Kotlin natively on your target platform. Now, coming back to the idea of simplifying, we run a Ktor server survey once a year, which means we've run 2 because we started it last year. And one of the things that people always tell us about, which they find harder to understand, is the extensibility model, right? So, which is kind of a shame, because one of the goals of Ktor is to be really extensible and allow you to essentially not only use what you want, but extend it to however much you want. And in fact, one of the things that we're working on is a marketplace to make all of the plugins even more discoverable, and also make it easier for people to submit their plugins. So that's work in progress, and that's going to be coming up. But that is the idea on which we want to build Ktor. So now these plugins, which are previously known as features, as I mentioned, in Ktor, everything is a plugin, right? Even routing, to a sense, is a plugin, although that's pretty much the only functionality that's bundled with the core. But everything else, whether you look at compression, whether you look at serialization, all of these are essentially plugins. And you can write and create any kind of functionality yourself with custom plugins. Now, that's good, that's great, right? And then you go ahead and say, okay, let me try and create this. And this is a nice blog post by a gentleman that had written everything that you need to kind of like, understand to write a plugin for Ktor. Now, it's not overly complicated, but it's not simple either. Let's be honest, right? In Ktor, you have the concept of a pipeline, and then you have a request that comes into the pipeline, and then you have these phases, and then in these phases you have these interceptors, and then the interceptors are the ones that do the work. And you need to not only understand all of this, but you need to know a little bit in detail about how everything should be working and tied together. So one of the things that we set out to do in 2.0 was to simplify the API for extensibility. So if you take a look at, for example, the old API, you could see something like this. This is I want to implement a feature, which, remember, now is called a plugin. I have to create an anonymous object of application, implement the interface application feature, then have this install function, and then do a whole bunch of stuff, and then have this companion, another class that is a reference class and a nested class, and it starts to become a little bit complicated, and it also gives you a little bit too much details of the insides of Ktor, which you not really should care to know about. I mean, you essentially say, look, I have a server-side application in this case, for instance, and I want to be able to say, okay, when a request comes in, add this functionality. Don't make me have to understand everything that's going on. So we've taken this, and you're absolutely right, and we've taken this old API and we've tried to simplify it. And we've come up with a new API, which is pretty simple. It's on call receive, and on call respond. And in principle, all of the functionality that we have in Ktor right now should fit within this model, with the exception of a few plugins. Now, we are in the process right now of converting our own plugins from the old API to the new API. There are a few cases where it feels like the new API may not fit in, but they're too few for us to kind of come up with a generic solution. So this is a point that is really important, is that if you are creating extensions for Ktor, we would love your feedback to see if there's any shortcoming in this API. Because once we have that feedback, combining that with those specific edge cases, we will enhance the API as needed. However, we really want to keep it as simple as possible. And one other aspect that we've done, and you notice here that we have the concept of an application plugin, which means that this is a plugin that is installed for the entire application, meaning that any request that comes in, any call, is going to go through this process. Now, we've also created another type of plugin, which is called the root scope plugin, which essentially boils it down to a specific root, meaning that I only want this functionality, this plugin, to act on this specific route. Now, obviously, you could also, in a way, do this using the application plugin, and the first step of your plugin would have to parse the route that's coming in, for instance. But the point here is that if you actually create rooted plugins, you can, in fact, have different ones for different routes. Okay, so these are some of the simplified APIs that we're adding to Ktor to try and make things somewhat easier. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about some other functionality that is available in the server. One pain point that always people were talking about is a random port. Something as simple as the concept of a random port. I want to start up my server on a random port. I want to do it for test for whatever reason. Can you allow that? Yes, we do. Now, if you pass in the parameter port equals 0, you're going to get a random port and be able to essentially do what you want with it. Obviously, the log file is going to spit that port information back to you. What other improvements do we have? So we have now support for XML serialization. We have support for subroutes when configuring plugins, which I just mentioned previously with the rooted scope plugin. And we have the ability to iterate over application configuration entries, which is also proving useful. And as I mentioned, we have 40+ bug fixes. And then there's a bunch of other features because, you know, I've mentioned, what, 10, 15 features, and I mentioned at the beginning that there's 30+ new features. There's a whole bunch of other features that are also available in 2.0. So this is a little bit covering some of the things that we brought for the server. And again, I really want to stress 2 points here. Setting the groundwork and making the changes for everything else that we're going to be building upon. Now let's take a quick look at what things are available for the client. So in regards to the client, again, we've tried to strive for simplicity, and we've created a simpler and more discoverable API. So now, for instance, if I want to do a client request with a post, in this case, I just do client post, and in the body, write whatever I want, and then the result, I always get back the same thing. But before we get to the result, notice one thing. This is no longer a generic type, generic function. So we've gotten completely rid of the post T, get T, etc. And we've tried to simplify it so that you can just not have to worry about this and not have to pass in the type initially when you call it, and we'll see how you get access to that. Because one of the changes is that now everything returns an HTTP response. Whereas if you are familiar with Ktor, the client from previously, the return type would be the generic type you pass in. Now everything returns an HTTP response. And then the receive of the T that you had previously is now replaced with a body, which is clearly indicating that you are returning the body. And then you can have there's helper function that says body as text, which means just give me the body back as text, or body as channel, which gives me the body back as a channel that can then be streamed, or however you want, whatever you want to do with that. Now, talking about the body, as part of the actual call, we now have a set body which provides me with the actual type of the data that I'm setting. And in that code, you can now set the body and do what you want, whether it's multi-part form, whether it's multi-part content, which is normally in form data multi-parts, whether it's JSON, whether it's just integer, whatever you want, you can just now use set body to do it. And again, trying to make things way more discoverable. So the body now includes this type to make it easier to use. Another feature that was demanded quite a bit was retries. So we now have built retries in, and instead of you having to worry about doing this yourself with any kind of coroutines, etc., we've now built that in. So now you can just say retry on and then do a server error and then say max retries, for example, 5, and then you pass in the function exponential delay, which creates an exponential delay, makes it a little bit longer each time between the retries. And you can also try and retry. You can also try and do a little bit more fine tuning on the types of retries. So you can say, if the retry is of a specific type, if it's on specific exception, then do different things, and then explicitly yourself do certain delays as well without having to do kind of any exponential delay function that we built in. So this makes it quite easy again, and hopefully a very simple and discoverable API to actually do retries with the client. The client now also comes with content negotiation. So much like the server, you now have the ability to do content negotiation as the client. And this makes it even smoother for microservice scenarios. One of the things that we set out in our roadmap was to try and get that parity between client and server. We want to make sure that, especially in in microservices setup where people are using Ktor for their servers, they're using it for their clients, we want to make that integration as smooth as possible and kind of bring that same functionality both to the client and the server. This is moving towards that. Other improvements that we brought to the client. So we've added some simple APIs for adding authentication headers, such as basic and bearer. You could just pass in the data inside those functions, and then it sets all the headers for you. We have support for interceptors at the request level. So you can now say a specific request, whether you want something to be intercepted or not. We have support for metrics plugin. And much like the server, we have XML serialization. And again, much as is the case of the server, we have bug fixes as well. Now, outside of these improvements, and again, much like the server side on the client, we've been focusing on creating a simpler, better named API and removing some concepts that weren't necessary. We have been working extremely hard on documentation, and extremely hard, I really mean extremely hard. In fact, my colleague Andre single-handedly is not only rewriting all of the documentation that is available for Ktor, but he's filling all of the missing gaps. And we've made sure that every single sample that you have on the documentation is up to date. Every time we deploy a new version of Ktor, that sample gets compiled to make sure that it is not outdated. And we're adding also functionality to try and run these samples, but at a minimum, you know that that code is up to date. We've done better organization of the documentation to group things between client and server. We've also collapsed it into areas that are around developing applications, deploying applications, etc., to make it easier for you to find. We are also continuing to working on the documentation at the API level. So this is docs, and then we've got the API. And by the way, all of these sample codes that you have in the documentation, the snippets, each of them are always available, as you can see at the very top. Find the project so you can just download that sample, which is isolated to showcasing that specific functionality, and get that to run. And given that it's using the right versions, everything should just run. In addition, we have been working hard on IDE support and the generator. So if you haven't checked out the new generator, it's already there on start.ktor.io. And it's basically, we made it as simple as possible, 2 steps: your project name, any additional settings that you want, and then the second one is choose the actual plugins. Each plugin entry that you click on, it's not only going to explain to you what it does, but it also gives you a sample. And this comes back to what I was talking about in terms of the marketplace. So our idea here now is to actually allow third parties to publish their plugins on this same marketplace system. So whether you're using the Ktor wizard or whether you're using the generator, you will eventually be able to see third-party plugins displayed here, which we feel is very important, not only to enhance the ecosystem, but to create that visibility for all of those plugin authors so that the Ktor customers, users, will be able to easily access their functionality and not have to go and find it in some obscure place or go to their GitHub page or what have you. They can easily just install it from there. This is part of, again, the foundation that we're setting to build Ktor on. When it comes to the IDE, we have now navigation inside the IDE, so you can easily navigate to specific endpoints. We have better discoverability, so I can see all of the different routes, and from the routes, I can see all of the requests being made everywhere that it's being used. We have refactoring built in, so especially if you're using something like client and server in the same project, for instance, you could easily, when you're refactoring the URL, it will take that into account as well. And of course, we have completion. All of these are part of the support that we're adding for the IDE. And I can tell you right now that we are adding a few new features which are going to blow your mind. Unfortunately, I can't show it just yet, but stay tuned because I think that they're going to make developing Ktor applications even more fun. But in summary, if we look at 2.0, what 2.0 has allowed us to do is get rid of some of the less than ideal decisions that were made initially. And this includes the way the modules were structured, the way the packages and the modules were named. And again, as it has some breaking changes, we really feel that it was necessary. And these breaking changes will be better in the long run. We've tried to simplify and improve the APIs for both the client and the server. And we've set the groundwork on what's to come. And there's a lot to come. So what is actually next? Well, one of the things that we had on our roadmap was to try and get better documentation in this year, was to get better documentation, was to simplify APIs, do a whole bunch of stuff. And there was two aspects that were on there as well. One of them was testability and deployments. We still haven't finished on those two. We didn't make it into 2.0, but we are working hard to make it into a minor upgrade of whether it's 2.1 or 2.2. So first of all is test scenarios for Ktor server applications. And again, this is where we would love any feedback. If you have any struggles or anything that you have when you're trying to test your server applications, we've been collecting a bunch of feedback. We've got a whole bunch of use cases, but the more we have, the better it is. We want to try and make testing scenarios for servers much easier. The other thing we want to focus on is deployments. Now, we're not, I personally believe that people don't generally deploy their applications from the IDE. There are some people that do right-click deploy, but generally you don't do that, right? It goes through a process. So in terms of deployment, what we want to try and do is make it easy to generate any configuration files necessary or anything that you will then place on your server or wherever to automate these types of deployments. We want to try and minimize how much you need to write in order to configure a container or whatever mechanism you use for deployment to actually deploy your server applications. And then, of course, we're working on 3.0, which is application level features. What does this mean? So if in 1.x we started to fix a whole bunch of bugs, make plans for 2.0, and we've been working on 2.0 and setting the groundwork, the next step is some of the things that people are asking for, such as database integrations, dependency injection frameworks, messaging. But I want to stress something here, and especially with dependency injection frameworks. We want to keep the idea that Ktor is a very simple and extensible framework always at heart. We do not want to make Ktor a bloated system. So you can write a simple HTTP endpoint or a full-blown applications with Ktor, only bringing in what you want without bloating it and without bringing in any kind of magic. Now, people have asked for this multiple times, and it's not hard to get any kind of database such as, or database API, whether it's JDBC, whether it's exposed, and combine that with Ktor. But it is a little bit of boilerplate code, and it is a little bit of guidance that people are lacking. And what we're trying to do is eliminate that part and help people get going as fast as possible. So all of these features that we're talking about, such as messaging, dependency injection, database integration, and service discovery, these are the way we're going to be building them. So you don't have to worry. We're keeping Ktor philosophy at heart all the way. And much, much more. And as I said, the marketplace is also there. So as we build that, as we make it available, any contributions from the community are welcome. And talking about contributions from the community, honestly, I really want to take a moment to thank all of the community members. We have a lot of contributions to Ktor. We have a lot of pull requests. We are not ignoring your pull requests. Ktor isn't a very large team. We're about 7 or 8 folks now. And we make sure that one of our priorities on every planning meeting is to attend to a minimum number of pull requests and address them. So please keep your contributions coming. We love them and we get to them as fast as possible. This is and always will remain an open source project, and anything that you contribute is more than welcome. And this isn't only in terms of code, but also in other ways. If you want to contribute samples, if you want to contribute documentation, everything is welcome. Now, where are we now with Ktor 2.0? Now, in the earlier this week, or was it last week? I think it was last week, the Kotlin Online Premiere, they talked about a beta. Unfortunately, we haven't actually managed to hit that beta. And there's going to be, we're going to kind of release in line with Kotlin 1.6 because of some dependencies we have there. However, the EAP program for Ktor has been open for a very long time now. And today, hot off the build server, we have created a fresh build for you, which is 2.00-EAP-256. In fact, it was 254 this morning, and we're like, no, 254 is a horrible number. It should be 256, right? That is what we should be using. So 256 has a lot of the functionality that I've mentioned. Now, the wizard functionality is not there yet. So that means that if you want to create a new Ktor project, the wizard isn't going to create the template for you, unfortunately. You'll still have to do that a little bit manually, but there is already examples and the samples are there for a 2.0, and we're already working on incorporating a 2.0 in the wizard, which will be available once we hit the beta, which we hope to be relatively soon in the next 3 to 4 weeks. We want to release that beta. And with that, that's basically a quick overview of what we have in Ktor 2.0, what we've done and what's coming. And thank you for your attention. And I think that maybe we can go to some questions if there are. Let me just check. Oh, yes, there are some questions over here. Okay, so my colleague isn't here, Sasha. So I'm just going to say that I assume I'm going to just read through these questions and then answer them one by one. Now, first question is how to get Ktor 2.0. As I mentioned, you can go to ktor.io/EAP and you get access to a 2.0. The only difference is that you have to include another repository, which is the space repository. Once we hit beta, that will no longer be required. We'll be publishing the beta on Maven Central. When is Ktor going to be available as Ktor as a Kotlin native target? Well, the client is, and the server, we saw just now that it is already as well. In 2.0, you can already try that and see how things go with that. Any plans on QUIC or HTTP3? Not any immediate plans, no, unfortunately not. Is there any way to work with WebSockets using retrofit? I believe so. I don't know if you have a specific question there about or any issues that you're encountering, please follow up with us later. And happy to reply, but I don't see why not. Well, why not the name the rest? Okay, so this is a comment. It says, well, why not name the rest something like core? I don't know what you mean by rest, but core now is essentially everything that is the base of Ktor. And, oh, okay, I see what you mean. You mean like everything that's not server and not client, name it core. Yeah, that's not a bad suggestion. We were actually thinking of shared at some point, but we dropped shared. But it's going to involve more changes. But yeah, that's a good suggestion. Well, good suggestion. I will bring it up to the team. Thank you for that. That's core. Core. Let's see how core does. Okay. Are there any feature additions regarding auto retry and connection failure with Ktor WebSockets? I believe that I don't think that we support the retry on WebSockets right now, but I can double check on that one as well. Right. When IntelliJ IDEA community plugin for Ktor coming back, is it even coming back? No, it's not. And I'll explain to you why. We believe strongly in trying to create a sustainable model. And we believe strongly in any open source project has to try and have a sustainable model for it to continue. Ktor is a project that's used internally inside JetBrains in many small and large projects, including our product space, but it's also used heavily outside of JetBrains. And we believe that just like Ktor, just like everything, we need to be able to create a business that allows us to continue to invest in these frameworks and maintain them. How do we do that? We sell tools. And part of that is what we're doing here as well. We want to bring first-class tooling support to Ktor, comparable to some of the other frameworks. And if you look at IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate, all of the other frameworks that we support, maybe Spring, Micronaut, all of those are only available in IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate. And we believe that this is the right direction. I know that this is unfortunate for some folks, I understand. There are other options that you have. You have obviously, well, I mean, you can use it outside of IntelliJ IDEA. You can use it out in the community edition. You won't get the wizard, you won't get the inspections, etc. But the wizard you can do start.ktor.io. That's always going to be there and free as well. And there's also different modeling licenses that you can obtain for our tools. But we do not plan to bring it back to IntelliJ IDEA Community Edition. How to migrate Ktor to in IntelliJ IDEA? Hard coding doesn't work, plus no options to migrate IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate. Yes, I just mentioned that. So we are in one of the next releases. We'll provide you with the plugin, which will be available in the next EAP of IntelliJ IDEA, and that's going to have the migration for you. Is there any way to install features across multiple modules? So essentially, features plugins act on all modules. The documentation is actually incorrect. And we only discovered this. It kind of shows that not a lot of people were using this, but we discovered that documentation was incorrectly saying that it was applicable to a single module, but it's actually applicable to all modules. Is there a sample project for the Ktor Client 2.0? Yes, there is. If you go to ktor.io / Ktor-samples on, github.com/Ktor.io /Github-samples, you'll be able to find some examples for the client. Is there any solution for WebSockets on iOS? We still depend on some issues with Kotlin native. As soon as that's solved, it's going to be solved. Would Ktor be good to use instead of Spring Boot? Well, hey, if you're asking me, sure, why not? But I'm not the one that's meant to be answering that. I think that maybe some folks on the channel can help you with that, or best thing you can do is experiment, evaluate both solutions and see which one fits you. Will WebSockets on the client and server be multi-platform compatible? On the client, I believe yes. On the server, well, we're still working on the multi-platform story on the server. The native, next question is already around native, which we've answered. And let's go to the next one. It says, are you thinking about publishing some of your design decisions on a higher level, like lessons learned or how to design a good and clean programming API? So actually, most of our design decisions are available now. If you go to UTrack, to the Ktor project, and you filter out the ticket design, every design ticket essentially is public, and it highlights what is it that we're trying to do, why we want to do it, what things we did wrong if it's a redesign, and what we want to try and accomplish. Beyond that, trying to maybe write some blog posts and stuff around lessons learned. Yep, that's a good idea. Again, requires time and bandwidth, which right now we're focusing on other areas. But hey, we're looking for a developer advocate as well for Ktor. So if you want to apply, you get to work with all of us, which is awesome. Any news direction on Swagger? Yes, we know that that's one of the highest voted issues on the list. We're working on it. I can't guarantee when it's going to be available. It's not being ignored. It's on our roadmap. We're going to get to it. Do not worry. Is there any clear doc to integrate it on Android? It depends what exactly you're talking about. Integrate with Android. Are you talking client or server? There are some docs available. If you have a more specific question, please shoot us up on either Stack Overflow or Slack. We have, which by the way, good to point this out, we have a Slack channel on the Kotlin Slack, which you can get to from kotlinlang.org, or you can get to ktor.io. Join it. We've got like 3,500 people are there already, and any questions you can ask there. How friendly is Ktor 2.0 with Android? I guess as friendly as 1.6. We're very much friends with Android. With the new plugin API, how would you intercept before a certain other plugin? Okay, so this is a good question. And what we're trying to do is avoid the complexity of ordering. And we're trying to work out the ways in which any dependent plugin that needs to be called would be called. This is, it would be great if you would come on the Slack channel or follow up with us or follow up with me, and I'll loop in the developers. My email is hadi, H-A-D-I, @jetbrains.com regarding this, because we want to make sure that all scenarios are covered in this case. And if there is a need for specific ordering, it should be important for that to be available. What's the advantage of using Graal VM with Ktor? Well, it's basically the startup time, and it becomes a native binary on the system. Is exposed documentation also updated? No, exposed is actually not part of Ktor. Although some people think it is for some weird reason, it's not part of Ktor. It's a completely separate project. It is being maintained at JetBrains. However, I'm not aware of what the state of the documentation team status is. The team for Ktor is small, ? How does one get hired to work on it? Well, it's actually not hard. You know, we've had job openings on the Ktor team for a long time now. We recently hired another developer, Daria, who she's just joined us, and we still have some positions available. So go to or just Google JetBrains careers Ktor, and you'll find the open positions that we have for Ktor. Swagger, we've already answered. And will there be WASM backend for Ktor server? That largely depends on Kotlin. We don't have any immediate plans there. We'll at some point be able to build gRPC services with Ktor. I guess it depends again on what specifically you need there. Best there is to either vote for the existing issues on gRPC or give us your use cases, and then we can look at scenarios and see when and how it would be possible to support. Obviously, you can use any library now for gRPC, but there is no direct plugin, as far as I know. I can't even remember. I've lost track for gRPC. Or maybe there is. What standard do you use for your programming? Clean architecture? No, dirty. We like dirty architecture. No, we don't use any standard. I mean, you know, we use code style standards, make sure that everything is unit tested, make sure that the code has separation of concerns, make sure that when we detect a bug, the first thing we do is try and reproduce it and then write a unit test to reproduce it and make sure that unit test goes into the suite of unit tests that we have. We try and do integration tests as well. I mean, all of the general things that you would have come to expect. And what is last question? What is your internal plan on when Ktor 2 becomes production ready? We are continuing to work on 3.0, which I mentioned. So 2.0 will start, and then we'll be issuing 2.1, 2.2, 2.3 updates, just like we did with 1.6. And we will also be working on the roadmap for 3.0, including the marketplace, everything that I mentioned in the last few slides. And when do you think it will become production ready? If that's kind of the question, we hope that it will be before the end of the year. So if things go well, which largely also depends on your feedback, especially for folks that are writing extensibility of Ktor and require those plugins. If everything goes well, we aim to release sometime in December, end of November, if everything goes well. Sorry, yeah, no, not end of November, sometime December or so. So yes, and with that, I think we're done with the questions. My colleague is saying there's one more. Hadi, please ask them to subscribe. Yes, very, very important. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. I can't remember what else there is. Subscribe, hit the notification bell. Oh, hit the likes. Don't hit the dislikes. No, you don't want dislikes. Who wants dislikes? Hit the likes, leave awesome comments, critical comments, think about it. If it's still critical, think about it again. If it's still critical, okay, fine, leave the comment. But make sure it's constructive so that I can learn at least. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you try out Ktor. And I hope to actually see you at some point in some real world scenario. And with that, thank you very much. And until next time, bye-bye.